Once upon a time, in the deepest part of a peaceful forest, there lived a little squirrel and a small rabbit. They were best friends and loved to play together all day long. One beautiful autumn morning, while they were gathering food for winter, the squirrel found an acorn that was bigger and rounder than any other. "Look, my friend," exclaimed the squirrel excitedly. "This is the perfect acorn. Let's share it and have twice as much fun." The rabbit nodded happily. Together, they carried their treasure back to their cozy burrow. They talked about how they could share it until they fell asleep, dreaming of warm nuts and happy times ahead. The next day, the squirrel woke up early and started gathering more acorns. He knew he couldn't eat them all by himself, so he decided to share his bounty with his friend. The rabbit was thrilled, and they spent the whole day playing and eating together. As winter approached, the forest became colder and darker. The squirrel and the rabbit huddled close to their acorns for warmth. They were grateful for each other's company and knew that sharing had brought them happiness. One snowy evening, as they were snuggling together, the squirrel said, "My dear friend, I have an idea. Let's share our burrow so we can keep each other warm all winter long." The rabbit agreed, and from then on, they slept side by side every night, sharing their food and their home. And so, the little squirrel and the small rabbit lived happily ever after, always remembering the importance of sharing and friendship. Now, as the moon shone brightly through the trees, it was time for them to rest once more. Good night, my dear child. Sleep tight. One day, the squirrel and the rabbit were playing in the forest when they met a lonely bird who had lost his way. They invited him to join them for lunch, and he happily accepted. As they shared their food, the bird told them about how sad he was to be alone and how much he missed his friends back at the lake. The squirrel and rabbit looked at each other knowingly. They decided that it was time to make another new friend, so together they led the lost bird back to the lake, where they found his flock of feathered friends waiting for him. The bird was overjoyed to be reunited with them, and the squirrel and rabbit felt warm inside knowing they had brought happiness to someone else. From that day on, the four friends became inseparable. They spent their days playing together and sharing their food. Sometimes, when it was particularly cold or rainy, they would all huddle together in a cozy burrow to keep each other warm. As winter turned to spring, the forest came alive with new life. Flowers bloomed, birds sang, and the squirrel and rabbit's acorn stash was nearly depleted. But they didn't mind at all, because they had so many wonderful memories and friends to share them with. One sunny afternoon, as they were sitting in the warm grass, the squirrel turned to the rabbit and said, "You know, my dear friend, sharing has brought us so much happiness. Let's continue to share our home, our food, and our love with everyone we meet." The rabbit nodded in agreement, and they vowed to always be there for each other, no matter what life through their way. And so, the little squirrel and the small rabbit lived happily ever after, surrounded by friends and love. They knew that as long as they shared, the world would be a brighter place for everyone. Good night, my dear child. Sleep tight. One day, while they were out gathering food again, the squirrel and rabbit met a sad little fox who was lost and hungry. They invited him to join them for dinner, and he eagerly accepted. As they shared their meal, the fox told them about how lonely he was and how much he missed his family. The squirrel and rabbit looked at each other again, this time with a determination in their eyes. They knew that they couldn't turn away from someone in need, especially not when they had so much to share. So, together, they led the lost fox back to his den, where they found his family waiting for him. The fox was overjoyed to be reunited with them, and the squirrel and rabbit felt warm inside knowing they had brought happiness to yet another new friend. From that day on, the 5 friends became inseparable. They spent their days playing together and sharing their food. Sometimes, when it was particularly cold or rainy, they would all huddle together in a cozy burrow to keep each other warm. And when the weather was nice, they would sit under the shade of a tree and enjoy the sunshine. As summer turned to fall, the forest began to prepare for another winter. The leaves changed color and began to fall from the trees, and the animals started to gather food for the long months ahead. The squirrel and rabbit were busier than ever, but they never forgot about their new friends. They made sure that everyone had enough to eat and a warm place to sleep. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun rose over the forest, the squirrel turned to the rabbit and said, "You know, my dear friend, sharing has brought us so much happiness. It's time we share our home with everyone who needs it." The rabbit nodded in agreement, and they decided that from that day on, their cozy burrow would be open to anyone who needed a place to stay during the harsh winter months. And so, the little squirrel and the small rabbit lived happily ever after, surrounded by friends and love. They knew that as long as they shared, the world would be a brighter place for everyone. Good night, my dear child. Sleep tight.